Hello, and welcome to the Project Good podcast. I'm your host, Anne Marie Hilton. Project Good is a social impact podcast interviewing experts and advocates about the pressing problems that we face globally and hearing how they suggest we move forward in the future. The Project Good podcast is brought to you by Project Good Work. The goal of this podcast is to inspire people and organizations to develop a mindset that can move others to positive action regarding the complex social issues facing people and the planet. For April, we're focusing on animal welfare, and this is a special edition episode with Mercy for Animals. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing AJ Albrecht, who is Managing Director for Mercy for Animals in the United States and Canada. She joined Mercy for Animals in 2019 as the organization's first U.S. government affairs team member, and she built and led the government affairs and public policy team for 3 years before stepping into her current role. As a licensed attorney, AJ was the past chair of the American Bar Association's Animal Law Committee, a past chair of the New Jersey State Bar Association's Animal Law Committee, and the founder of East Orange Animal Alliance. AJ's passion for animals goes beyond her work as she personally acts as a foster mom for a number of dogs. Let's get into the interview. Humans have caused a significant impact on animal species due to animal exploitation and abuse. In addition to ethical concerns, animal species have a significant impact on the environment and ecosystems. One of the areas that are affecting humans directly is how we interact with our farm animals. AJ Albrecht previously was a legislative attorney with an organization dedicated to companion animal protection. She's a frequent speaker on animal advocacy issues and has published on topics relating to our food system, farm animals, and animal law. Welcome, AJ.
Thank you so much, Anne Marie. It's great to be here.
Hi, I'm so glad that you have taken some time out of your busy schedule today to talk to us a little bit about Mercy for Animals. But before we jump into the questions, I always like to get to know each of our guests in a little personal way of how they became who they are. So, your career has looked at all different aspects of, animal welfare. I guess what got you kind of started in that direction in your life with a focus on animals?
Thanks so much. Yeah, I think when I'm asked this question, it's always kind of an internal question of how far back to look. To be honest, I've shared my life with non-human animals for pretty much since the day I was born, but never really imagined that this could or would be a career. I think a lot of animal advocates might have grown up thinking they would be veterinarians or dog trainers or something like that, and that was never my path. I went to law school and practiced family law for a number of years before realizing that animal law was even an option for a career. And it happened to me in a pretty lucky way, as is the case for many practicing litigating attorneys. My position was very grueling, and I was honestly quite depressed in the work I was doing. And the place that I felt most whole was volunteering with animals at a local animal shelter. And through that, I met another attorney who told me about the American Bar Association's Animal Law Committee, which I joined, and met so many other like-minded attorneys who were advocating for animals professionally. And from there, I was able to turn this into a career and really just feel so fortunate to have been able to do so. As you noted, started out advocating for dogs and cats, specifically on breed-specific legislation for dogs, which is an issue very close to my heart as I share my home with dogs who are frequently discriminated against and called pit bulls, although they're really mixed breed dogs. And then moved over to the farmed animal space where I am now, and of course what Mercy for Animals focuses on back in 2019. So we are advocating to end industrial animal agriculture, also known as factory farming, and feel very fortunate to be dedicating my career to this mission.
Wow. Yeah, that's definitely different than I thought. That usually when you hear people when they have a passion for animals, they're like since I was like out of the womb. And so that's interesting that you got to develop this passion after I guess I would say I guess the easy way I was describe it is seeing into your own interaction of how animals I guess helped you
Right.
out move from one space to another, and then you saw that they have you know um, you know not that the animals didn't have a greater purpose, but you had a more personal interaction with them.
Right. Yeah. I mean, growing up, we had companion animals in our home, ranging from a tarantula to rats to my mom was always rescuing cats. We had numerous dogs, but I just always saw them as a part of our family and a part of life, and just never really realized that aside from being a veterinarian, which I knew was not for me, that there were any other jobs or career paths that would allow me to interact with animals or advocate for them as it was.
Yes, that's fantastic. I wanted to now kind of jump in, and I guess we should first, for everyone, introduce a little bit about who and what is Mercy for Animals before we dive in a little bit deeper into the topic of how things in the world is shaping around farm culture for animals and how it's affecting all of us. But I guess first tell me about the organization Mercy for Animals.
Certainly. So, Mercy for Animals' mission is to construct a just and sustainable food system. And we're doing that by working to end factory farming or industrial animal agriculture. And our vision is a world where animals are respected, protected, and free to pursue their own interests. So, what that means is we're a global organization. In my role, I oversee our work in the United States and Canada, but we are active in Brazil, Mexico, expanding to Southeast Asia. We're already in India, working on this mission. And we have numerous interventions. We're working with corporations to get them to have higher animal welfare standards and offer more plant-based food options. We have a government affairs department that is working to change laws so that they're more beneficial towards farmed animals. We have a wonderful network of volunteers that our organizing department is consistently galvanizing to work on our campaigns. We also have our Transfarmation project where we partner with factory farmers or former factory farmers who are just as exploited by this system as slaughterhouse workers, animals, consumers, and we partner with them to also bring about systemic change. So that's Mercy for Animals in a nutshell. As you can imagine, I could go on, and I'm looking forward to your other questions about our work.
Yes. So, one of the things that really appealed as I was doing my research on Mercy for Animals and just looking at this topic in general is that Mercy for Animals, as you mentioned, has a global reach. And why I think that is important is that you understand, one of the things I always try to emphasize on this podcast is that we are all globally connected. And so the one thing that makes us all, I guess you would say human or all level at the same level is that we all have to eat. That's the number one thing. It doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, if you're rich or poor, well, whatever culture you have to eat. And so, this is an extremely important topic because we are in, I guess you would say, a critical, or in some cases, some people have called it the tipping point period of life, of making the decision about, how do we proceed in the future with our planet and society, and how do we, what's our future mindset going to be about life and how we, move forward. And so one of the things, I guess, that because of the organization is a global organization, can you kind of explain, I guess, the problems that are maybe not known to the average person that farmers are facing? A lot of people, I think, they don't know that farmers are facing problems. They just realize this food shows up on my plate somehow.
Certainly. So, corporate consolidation in the industrial animal agriculture industry is really pervasive. In the US, there are really only 4, arguably 5 corporations that control our entire meat industry. And what that means is that the small family farmer really doesn't exist anymore. These farmers have been forced to enter into contracts with these huge meat companies just so that they can compete. And the way that these contracts are structured is through what's called vertical integration. And in a nutshell, what that means is that the farmers bear all of the risk and reap almost none of the reward, because the costs are all externalized by these meat companies who ensure that it's the farmers, it's the neighboring communities, it's the animals, and it's the consumers who are really bearing the cost of cheap, quick, easily accessible meat. So because of this, we recently released at Mercy for Animals, I believe late last year, a report about the economic state of American farmers. And some of our findings through that report were really remarkable. And one that stood out for me is that the majority of American farmers, this is not how they are earning their money. It's not lucrative. They all have other jobs outside of farming to support the farm, because what's happening is they'll be raising chickens or pigs or whatever animal it is, and they're responsible for doing things like upgrading their farms to ensure that they're still going to receive a flock and be able to keep farming. They don't know what kind of feed they're going to receive from the company which oversees how these animals are bred and how these animals are fed and when they arrive and when they're taken to slaughter. So as a result, it's just not a predictable source of income. And truly, these farmers are in debt and they're horribly exploited by these meat companies. So as a result, Mercy for Animals takes the approach that if we're going to make systemic change to factory farming and ensure that not only we're protecting animals, but we're also protecting farmers and neighboring communities and consumers, we have to work together. We have to move past the nuance of why we all recognize that this system is broken and instead focus on it is broken. We agree on that. And this is how we're going to fix it.
Yes. And I think a lot of people, when, like, I'll just take myself for instance, when we think about the farm, right? We don't think that we think that you're just like a full-time farmer, but the way that you can now put it is like farming has become kind of a sidekick for people, because it doesn't keep well, in their case, that maybe food on the table and a bit, I guess, pun or pun not intended, and keep the lights on, because of the fact that there's so much upkeep just to be a farmer. And so, that when people started thinking about that from, I guess, getting more personalized sense, at first people are I would think that they would be like, oh, okay, well, that sounds horrible for the farmer, but it's not affecting me. But it really is affecting people. One of the things that people have to start thinking about is that if the time and effort and the dedication is not being put into the food and the items that we are all consuming, which then of course helps us as humans grow and thrive and things like that, that this should be like, maybe number one top concern for everyone across the world, because as I mentioned before, without food, we don't even exist, right? And so, can you, well, the only thing that I think that, and it's only because it was popularized, I believe, like last year and maybe a little bit at the end of 2020, that people think about is that they think about like, they've seen some of the photos about like on the chicken farms of how all the chickens are lined up, but they don't really understand, I guess, like, how is this really affecting, the people, the chickens, and everything like that.
Yeah, so I think what you've touched on is really why Mercy for Animals is known for, perhaps first and foremost, doing undercover investigations of factory farms and slaughterhouses to truly show the conditions that these animals, these farmers, these workers are existing in order to support the meat industry's ever-growing production of animal food products. So yeah, let's talk about what we call broilers. Broilers are meat chickens. These chickens are raised in what are called chicken houses. If you have driven anywhere in the southeast of the US in particular, you have likely seen these. They are very large houses, really about the size of a football field. And these chickens live indoors, mostly in the dark, if not entirely in the dark, for their entire short lives. Their lives are so short because these chickens have been bred to grow extremely quickly in a very short period of time. So whereas even 20, 30 years ago, a chicken would not be ready for slaughter for a number of months, now some of these breeds are bred to be large enough for slaughter in just a mere 60 days. So the chicks are dropped off and they live inside this shed where they hardly have any room to move around. They're living amidst their own filth, their own feces. Anyone who has visited a broiler chicken farm will tell you that the smell is absolutely overwhelming. It's an ammonia smell. And these chickens grow so quickly that very soon they can't support their own weight because their legs are not strong enough for them to hold themselves up. So they tip over, they tip forward because their chicken breasts become so heavy. And they tip over. Most recently, we documented these on a farm that supplies Costco. And we were really calling out, how is it possible that Costco is selling rotisserie chickens for just $5? And the footage that we were able to show the world, which was eventually broken by the New York Times, was really alarming to a lot of consumers, and it did allow us to get Costco to come to the table and commit to some higher welfare standards. So many of these chickens do not even make it to slaughter because they become so ill that they either die or the farmer has to kill them before going to slaughter because they are suffering. But if they do make it to slaughter, they're picked up by a truck and thrown into cages where they can't stand up or turn around. They're packed in so tightly, and they're brought to a slaughterhouse. In the United States, we do have a law that is supposed to create kind of the misnomer of humane slaughter, but that does not apply to birds. So the Humane Methods of Slaughter Act, as it's called, does not cover poultry. It only covers what's defined as livestock, so cows and pigs, etc. So what we have for the majority of chicken slaughter in the U.S. is called live shackle slaughter. These animals are hung upside down on a slaughter line that moves extremely quickly, approximately 1,400 birds per minute is what we're dealing with. And then they are they are slaughtered and then they go into scalding hot water. But because they're moving so quickly, very often they miss the part where they're supposed to be slaughtered, and they end up in this scalding water still alive and are essentially boiled alive. So as you can imagine, for anyone, this is horrific, and our undercover investigations really shine a light on this, and show how devastating this is for the animals. But I do want to emphasize that this is really devastating for slaughterhouse workers as well, who are forced to stand shoulder to shoulder and make the same cut or the same movement for 8-hour days with only 2 15-minute breaks and a short break for lunch. During COVID, we saw that slaughterhouse workers were suffering rates of COVID and deaths due to COVID even higher than incarcerated people throughout the United States. And they were forced to work. They were forced to work because the federal government took the position that it was necessary for our country to keep producing meat, even to a surplus in many cases. So really this industry is exploiting everyone in the system, and not least of all is the consumer. So it's no secret that bird flu right now is a huge problem. There's an outbreak going on throughout the United States right now, and that is rampant because we are factory farming. We're having animals be so close together that these avian flus are so contagious that they're moving through these flocks and these birds so quickly. And many of these diseases are zoonotic, meaning that they could be passed on to humans. And with us still having COVID and having just kind of come out of the worst of this pandemic, this is a risk to consumers as well. And the way that we farm is really dangerous for human health.
Wow. I feel it's disturbing. And what can I say? All I can say now is, should we all become vegan?
I'm vegan, which of course I'm sure doesn't surprise you or doesn't surprise any listeners. And of course, in my ideal world, everyone would not only go vegan, but would recognize that there are so many delicious plant-based options, which are becoming more affordable and more accessible every day. But really, I think it's important that we meet people where they are. And even if you are just reducing some of your animal food consumption, any reduction is a good reduction. So that could look like cutting out one area of food or not eating any meat products or animal products one day a week, or not eating any animal products until a certain time of day, maybe only eat them at dinner. And having that gradual reduction and recognizing that you don't have to go vegan overnight. For myself personally, I was vegetarian, meaning that I was still consuming dairy and eggs for over a decade before I went entirely vegan. And even then, it was a gradual process, with eggs being the last thing that I gave up. So I think that one narrative that the meat industry has helped to spin is that vegans are radical and we're all or nothing and black and white when it comes to this issue. And I would really challenge that. I think that knowing that someone is reducing in any way is a tremendous benefit to our climate, to animals, to workers, to this entire system that we really need to break down and reconstruct.
Yes. And so, I guess if we go, I'm going to turn the dial of back, because it's always interesting, I think, to figure out how did we get here?
Mm-hmm.
Did we get here because we really do need this, increased amount of meat, or is it just that we became greedy, I guess? Do we need this amount of meat that we have been producing?
So I'll answer your kind of second question first, which is we have an incredible amount of food waste, especially when it comes to meat and animal products. that is really, again, that narrative that big ag and the meat industry has spun, is that we need more and more meat. I think a really good example of that is in the beginning of COVID, when the meat industry recognized that their slaughterhouse workers were dying at alarming rates, and as a result, they were having trouble keeping the doors open and having enough staff to continue slaughtering animals. One of those companies took out a massive full-page ad in the New York Times, as well as other newspapers throughout the country, threatening a meat shortage. And they did that to get the administration to respond by invoking a very rarely used law that essentially required slaughterhouse doors to stay open. And at the time, this seemed absolutely incredible. But what's incredible now is the pork industry recently released their figures for how much pork was produced during that time period. And it's significantly more than the year before. So in other words, it was the boy who cried wolf. They were saying that there was going to be a shortage when really they were overproducing as per usual. So again, that narrative is just not based in fact. It's not based in reality. We do have a surplus of meat in this country, and we're producing more and more every year. That's not to say that we're not also consuming more, unfortunately, but the food waste does show otherwise. To answer your question as to how we got here, really about 30 to 40 years ago, the then Secretary of the USDA said, get big or get out, which became and still is a very famous quote as to how factory farming started getting out of control. This corporate consolidation just started spiraling out of control, and that's really when the small family farmer became a thing of the past. At this point, the animal food products in our grocery stores, the meat, the dairy, the eggs, 99% of that is coming from CAFOs, or concentrated animal feeding operations, aka factory farms. That applies even when you're talking about grocery stores seen as high standards like Whole Foods or Sprouts. We just are no longer farming food in any way aside from factory farming, large scale. This was a conscious decision by the U.S. and the USDA to go in this direction, and this is how we've ended up where we are. And I think what's really scary is that other countries, especially China, are looking at this model of farming and they're replicating it. Perhaps some listeners have seen or read about the hog farms in China that are multi-story. So it's football field upon football field of skyscrapers of pigs. And they have taken our U.S. factory farm model and are leveling it up, which is truly terrifying and really humbling to think, for me at least personally, that our work in the U.S., while hugely important, we're slaughtering 10 billion animals per year. Here in the United States, 9 billion of them chicken. More than half of all farmed animals, including fish, are in China and India, and more than 10% are in Southeast Asia. And that's why Mercy for Animals is expanding into these areas and really looking at this on a global scale.
Yes. I keep getting a bunch of visuals in my head as you're describing this. And I feel like, I know they're animals, but it's almost like we're putting animals in concentration camps. That's what I keep, kind of visualizing for animals. And so it just, it's horrifying when I think about this. One of the things, though, that we're not thinking of and that we all have to think of, even though it is overwhelming, because, we are just, little humans, but we are on this, big planet. And all these things that we're doing are affecting the environment to some extent. And one of the biggest things that that gets brought up, or at least the articles that I read and the most popular, of course, the thing that was popping up a lot in the news was had to do with cows. So cows were adding to the pollution of rivers and how all of that was contributing, of course, down the scale to then we have, it's like pollution in our water that leads to, other illnesses and things that would start to affect us. But the question that I always ask, so we have all of these animals that we have, bred or quickly produced, but what do we, how can we turn this around? Like, what did we do with the cows if we start to limit how much, impact, or I guess, how can we start to stop this?
So this isn't going to be a solution that happens overnight. As you acknowledged, we haven't really even begun to touch on the climate impacts in this conversation, but globally, the life cycle greenhouse gas emissions from animal ag are higher than the direct emissions of all trains, planes, and cars in the entire transport sector. And that's a fact that I think many folks don't realize is how significant of a CO2 emitter our factory farming industry is. So with the gravity of this system, not just the greenhouse gas emissions, but also the incredible number of animals and how lucrative, unfortunately, this system is, this isn't going to be an overnight fix. And at Mercy for Animals, we believe that it's also not going to be one intervention that makes the systemic change. Our theory of change is that if we push on these various different levers, whether it's getting corporations to commit to higher animal welfare standards or having more plant-based options, or getting government officials to pass laws, or getting farmers to change the narrative in rural communities about how to make a living, all of these interventions are worthy. And once we reach that tipping point, from all of them working together, then we can create and construct this new system. I wanted to talk a little bit about our Transfarmation project, which I think does really hit on kind of this breaking down of the system and creating something new. Those chicken houses that I described earlier, as you can imagine, are very expensive to heat and cool and light and really maintain. And one of the biggest reasons why these farmers, despite many of them wanting to get out of their contracts, one of the reasons that they stay is because they don't know what they would do with this infrastructure, do with this chicken house, as it may be, if they were to stop farming. And that's where our Transfarmation project comes in. We are partnering with farmers who have stopped farming animals or are in the process of stopping farming animals to use those chicken houses to grow something else. We have farmers who are growing hemp and then drying it in those chicken houses. We have farmers who are growing mushrooms. It turns out these chicken houses, and we have one former hog facility as well. It turns out they're the perfect place to grow fungi or mushrooms, specialty mushrooms. We have folks that are farmers that are growing microgreens. And we even have a farmer who has come full circle and converted one of those houses into an animal shelter for dogs who are homeless in their community. So I really think that in order to solve this problem, we have to be thinking outside of the box and creatively like this. And like I said, I think at the beginning of this, we also have to set aside our differences and the nuance of why we might disagree and recognize that we can solve this together if we focus on what we have in common, which is that we want to construct a more just food system.
Yes. And I guess if I'm going to just assume, but you can tell me if you disagree. I guess from your perspective, you would say that it's really about, I guess, education for across the board for everyone, and kind of, I guess, relearning.
Yeah, I think so. I think education, public awareness. There's a reason why most people don't realize where their food comes from, or what the inside of a chicken house looks like or smells like. The industry, the factory farming, big ag industry, has intentionally made it very difficult to permeate. And I think that it behooves those of us who do understand, and those of us doing this work, to raise the public awareness so that consumers can make good choices and make change with their wallet, so to speak. And then finally, I think it comes down to open-mindedness and inclusivity. And that's really recognizing that kind of the same vein that we were speaking earlier about reducing animal food consumption, and not just assuming that everyone can or will go vegan overnight. We can be mission aligned with someone, meaning that they also want to end factory farming, but they're coming at it from a different perspective, and accepting that we have strength in numbers, and in order to grow those numbers and that people power, we have to accept one another and move past our differences.
So I guess if you were going to, I know that you personally are not a farmer, but if we were going to, I guess, put together kind of an idealized, how a farm should operate, and let's say, ideally, of course, we'd love everybody to go on the vegan route if they were willing to, but if not, I guess, how should a farm operate in the future when it comes to animal welfare?
Yeah, so really I would point to a piece of legislation that's already out there that would make enormous change in our factory farming and our agricultural industry as a whole. And that is Senator Cory Booker's Farm System Reform Act, which was first introduced a couple years ago now. And first and foremost, what that would do is it would create a moratorium on future enormous animal feeding operations or factory farms. And I think that's really number one, is farms need to stop being so huge, because the only way that animal ag can be that enormous is if you are confining animals in an extremely cruel manner. And we find ourselves having to undo much of that by trying to pass laws that get these animals out of cages and crates. And if we would simply put a moratorium on creating any more of these factory farms, that would go a long way. I would also say that there is a huge demand for plant-based food products right now, particularly as there becomes more competition in that market with all of the food innovation and food tech that's coming out. Ingredients are going to be needed to make these products. So although there is not really a movement of new farmers right now, we work with farmers, and we're constantly hearing that the future generations just don't want to inherit the farm. But if there are folks out there who want to get into farming, farm plants. There's such a mushroom trend right now, for example. That's why many of our transformation farmers are choosing to farm mushrooms in their former chicken houses. There's a demand for plants right now, whether that's specialty crops for human consumption or ingredients for making these delicious plant-based food products.
That's sad. Yeah, I have noticed just in the grocery store. So I've been, at Whole Foods and out here in California. We have another market, Sprouts and things like that. So I have noticed there is a big push for vegan food. And well, I'm in California, so there's always a big push for vegan food. But one of the things, and because you are a global organization, I wanted to kind of discuss a little bit and make this have a global touch, is that what part of the world do you think that animals are most at risk currently?
I would have to say China. This is where over half of animals are being farmed. And that number is on the rise. As I spoke about earlier, this factory farming model that really seems as though China learned from us here in the U.S. Is being taken to a higher level. So particularly when it comes to farmed animals, I would have to say China. And of course, the environmental impacts of that is harming wildlife. We can see examples of this just in habitat degradation of wildlife all over the world, just the warming of the planet that is taking place in large part because of the agricultural sector.
Yes. When I started thinking about, animals and how, I watched some of the videos, and I suggest everybody should watch some of the videos on and Mercy for Animals, because they were interesting. That touched on how that the environment was getting impacted, not just for the animals themselves, but how that, and usually most farms are in rural areas. And so these communities then tend to be smaller, and because, as we mentioned before, a lot of the farmers have to have, multiple jobs because of the economics are just not panning out as they used to for farmers. And so that in the video that I watched is affecting these communities. And one of the biggest things that people are not necessarily thinking about is that how, it has this ripple effect on, the economy, not only for farmers, but those people in the town. And then, and because of the pollutants, and that people are, either getting them by air or through water. And so then it leads to illnesses. And then, of course, we just went through this whole crazy COVID, and depending on where you are in the world, you still may be dealing with COVID. And so being that is, transmitted by air, it just continues the problem. So I would say worrying about animals is number one, because it really does affect us a lot deeper than we think on the surface. I definitely, until I started diving in, wasn't thinking into it that deeply until I was like, oh, okay, wait, just a minute here. It really does dive really deep. That comes literally not only to our plate, but to our bodies as well. And so I wanted to kind of wrap it up a little bit about talking about two more things. So I wanted to talk about the EATS Act a little bit, and how that is affecting, or you would say if you feel that it really is protecting low income households, if it's not, or I guess I would just like to get your thoughts.
Yeah, for sure. So the EATS Act, that stands for Exposing Agricultural Trade Suppression Act. It was introduced last Congress. It has not been introduced again this Congress, which we at Mercy for Animals are glad that it was not. This bill would essentially undermine state farmed animal protection laws by restricting states' ability to create higher welfare standards for farmed animals. So I'll use Proposition 12, as we refer to it here in California. I'm in California as well. I'll use that as an example, as it was really the first, and at its time, it was a historic law, that ballot initiative, and then law that was passed here. And it essentially made it so that pigs, veal calves, and egg-laying hens had to have more space and get out of extreme confinement. So pigs currently housed in gestation crates where they can't even turn around for the duration of their pregnancies would be given enough room to stand up and turn around and be housed in group housing. Egg-laying hens would be given enough space to spread their wings and dust bathe, and veal calves as well would be given enough space to stand up and turn around. So it sounds pretty basic, right? Like basic protections. And that was passed overwhelmingly by California voters in 2018. And almost immediately, the big meat industry, that's the American Farm Bureau Federation and the National Pork Producers Council, began fighting this because they see that it is more lucrative for them, and the dollar is driven by this extreme confinement. And that they challenged the ballot initiative, and that case has gone all the way up to the Supreme Court of the United States. It was argued in October, and we are expecting a decision really any day now. So the EATS Act is another attempt by big ag lobbyists in the meat industry to undermine those laws and make it so that they would be preempted at the federal level, and extreme confinement would be allowed to move forward. So we are expecting the EATS Act to come back probably in the Farm Bill process. The Farm Bill is in a reauthorization year right now in 2023. It comes up every 5 years. And we do expect there to be language in there at some point in that process. And we're prepared to oppose it as we did last Congress, and hope that we're able to defeat it once again.
Yes, it's it's after the beginning of our discussion and getting the visualization of just hundreds and hundreds of birds just being hung upside down, scalding hot water, animals being confined, stacked on each other. It's sad to think that everyone or there's a good portion of people that are just always thinking of the money instead of being humane.
That's right.
Yes, it's just it's making my stomach turn a little bit when I think about it. So I guess in closing, what would you say that how can everyday people help Mercy for Animals or make an impact in a positive direction to change the situation?
Yeah, so you probably won't be surprised to hear my first answer, which is to reduce the amount of animal food products that you're consuming. It really does make a difference how your food choices, what you choose to spend your money on, and you can vote with your wallet, so to speak, by shifting some of your eating towards plant-based options. So that would be the first on an individual level. And the second would be to use your voice to allow your elected officials and the corporations that you support by buying their products to hear from you. So whether that's contacting your state representative, your local representative, your member of Congress, and letting them know that farmed animal protection matters to you, that you think farmed animals should be respected and protected. Whether that's seeking incremental change, like asking corporations to have higher animal welfare standards, getting their animals out of cages and crates. I think that if anything, we've learned over the past few years, grassroots advocacy and collective action really does work. When you look at movements like other social justice movements, that is like Black Lives Matter, the Me Too movement, systemic change has come about from folks coming together and raising their voices. And we can do the same thing for farmed animals. We just have to be heard and make sure that these decision makers and policymakers are held accountable to what they campaign on, and to vote the ones who aren't aligned with us out of office.
Thank you, AJ, for your time and insight. If you'd like to learn more about AJ, you can go to mercyforanimals.org. If you have a passion for an unserved community, a social justice problem, or simply want to change minds, contact Project Good Work at projectgood.org to start your project of change today. We'd like to send our deepest gratitude to our ongoing show supporter, Blair Chapman. Subscribe to our mailing list at projectgood.work/subscribe to get our episodes and blog articles sent to you each month, plus get a 10% discount on any project you start on projectgood.work. Guess what, everybody? It's conference time. We are launching a conference called the Changemaker Conference. Register now to attend our virtual conference for only $79. Once you register, you get the conference and you also get to be a lifetime member of our Changemaker community. Go to www.changemakerconference.com to register today. To our listeners, thanks for listening to Project Good, where we're focused on what matters.